Hello boys, let us continue with the lesson of history. That was the first lesson, the first war of independence. In the last class we had studied about the revolt of 1857 or the first war of independence and its causes, which causes led to the revolt, starting from the political causes which talked about the kings, the princes, the rule, the policies related to the Nawabs, the Rajas and the kings. Then we came to the economic causes which were telling you about the farmers, the peasants, the artisans, the handicraftsmen, how the British policies affected them, how it led to poverty, starvation, unemployment among the people, among the educated class where they were not given jobs. Then we talked about the social and religious causes where we talked about the spread of Christianity through the Christian missionaries in various places or at various places, schools, colleges, jails. Then the banning of certain social evils, the passing of an act passed by Lord William Bentinck to ban sati. So these things which were done by the British at that time were taken as an interference in the rule of the kings, interference in the social and religious customs of the people. They're losing their jobs, they're losing their means of livelihood, and they all blamed the British for this state of affairs and their condition and felt that only by the removal of the rule would their problems come to an end. In fact, the soldiers also were very much discriminated, less salary, least promotion, that of a subedar, not given any right to hold weapons or to revolt against the British. Then the toll soldiers were mainly from Awadh, so they were also dissatisfied why their province was being annexed on a pretext of maladministration. So these were various reasons that led to the first war of independence, and it proves the title also that why it was called as the first war of independence. Now after that in the book we have the events which is not in your syllabus, so we come straight to the results of the first war of independence or the consequences of this war or this rebellion of 1857. The first heading that has been given or the first point is that the East India Company was abolished. So you have to write another heading to these points and please write it down. It is the administrative changes after the rebellion. Please write it. I repeat the heading, the administrative changes after the rebellion of 1857 or the first war of 1857. So the first point in that is I have already sent a PDF of the chapter to you. I have in fact marked the points, numbered the points, so you can have a look at those points. But in the class I will again read and explain those points. The first is that the East India Company was abolished. Second, the administration was now handled straight away by the Crown, the British Crown. The company's board of control, the court of directors were abolished. The powers were now transferred to a cabinet with an officer or a cabinet minister known as the Secretary of State, and this Secretary of State would be assisted by a council of 15 members who was to be assisted by a council of 15 members, and all his expenses, his salary, his allowances had to be borne by the revenues that were collected in India. The government of India was to continue by being headed by a governor general who was given a new title. Now he was also known as the viceroy. So you can be asked as to who was the first viceroy of India. So you can, it is mentioned later on in the chapter, but you can always write over there. The Lord Canning was the first viceroy of India. And this viceroy would be having an executive council of 5 members who would be advising the officer, the executive officer or the viceroy, and would be heading the various departments. Next comes the Queen's Proclamation, that is the announcement made by the Queen with this heading, the Queen's Proclamation of 1858, and what changes were brought by this proclamation. As we've just discussed that Lord Canning was the first viceroy. So the rest of the points that are mentioned in the book and are telling you about the Queen's Proclamation is that no more would the Indian states would be annexed. The treaties that the princes had signed with the company would still be honored. They'll still exist and they'll still be honored. Then they said goodbye to the doctrine of lapse. If you remember the doctrine of lapse that was passed by Lord Dalhousie, where he stated that any king or ruler who did not have a natural heir to the throne, a successor, that kingdom would add to the British Empire or under the British. Then the office of the Peshwa was abolished because there was no trace of Nana Sahib after the revolt. And the Mughal dynasty, you can be asked a question, what was the result of the revolt on the Mughals? So you will write, the Mughal dynasty established by Babur came to an end with the death of Bahadur Shah. Then comes the reorganization of the army. There can be a possible question, what changes were brought in the army after the First War of Independence? I repeat the question, what were the changes brought in the army by the British after the First War of Independence? So the first point in that is that the Indian soldiers were reduced. The European soldiers were increased. If you remember, because of the Indian soldiers being more in number, they had revolted. So now they thought that they should decrease the number of Indian soldiers and increase the European soldiers. Then more of the soldiers would be recruited from martial races of Punjab and Nepal. The ones who had that the warrior class, the fighting class would be taken from these two places, Punjab and Nepal. And because they had been loyal to the government, they had been loyal to the British during the revolt. Then all the artillery, other effective weapons were now to be reserved for the British troops. They could not be used and handled by the Indians. The Indians were excluded from all the officers' ranks. They were not being given any officers' rank. The European troops were kept at very important geographical and military positions where they were really required, where the British feared that there may be some rebellion or there can be some reaction to the various changes that were being brought up. So they placed these officers or they placed these troops, European troops, at these strategical places. Then the section of the Indians in the army or the Indian section in the army was based on the policy of balance and counterpoise, meaning or divide and rule, so that they could not face any more or they will not face any more anti-British uprising. To avoid all the uprisings, they used this policy of balancing the soldiers and then to rule them, to divide them accordingly on the basis of caste and creed and religion, and then to go on ruling and save the rule from any anti-British uprising. There was discrimination on the basis of caste, religion and region in recruiting soldiers. They followed that also, that from where which caste should be appointed and then how they could discriminate these castes so that there is never any unity between the castes, between the soldiers of different castes. Then they dealt with the princely states. The states which had been loyal to the British, the states which had been there to suppress the revolt, they were rewarded by the British. First, the doctrine of lapse was over. Secondly, no interference was declared, that there would be no interference in the internal affairs of the rulers, and in fact the Nizam of Hyderabad was relieved of so much of his debt, that is 5 lakh pounds of debt that he had was paid by the British for his being loyal to the British. And only if there was any misgovernance in any state will the British or would the British interfere. Now the British also felt that during the revolt, they felt that the people were very much united, and they rebelled because of the unity that was there between people. So they tried to reverse that by using the divide and rule policy, and dividing the people on the basis of their caste, creed, province versus province. And they also felt that the Hindus and Muslims were also very much united during the rebellion, and so they thought of dividing them by being helpful to one community and repressing the other community. Then they announced that there would be religious freedom given to the people, and the people would be appointed to high post. In the field of economy, or in the economic field, you could see that the exploitation which was there and which had led to the rebellion was still there, and it became more prominent after the rebellion, or after the first war of independence. Under the Crown's rule, it became more serious and much wider. Right? It became much more prominent after the first war of independence. Now, the last heading that has been given on page number 69 says that there was a symbol of patriotism. We know we had studied about Bahadur Shah, we studied about Rani of Jhansi, we studied about Nana Sahib. They failed in their mission, but they opened the way for the rise of a modern national movement. Many people were inspired by this revolt, by this rebellion, by this first war of independence. The heroism of the struggle left a deep impression on the minds of Indians, and it inspired the